بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه الطيبين الطاهرين لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله نسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. We ask Allah to grant us all the sincere intention. In our previous session, we were speaking about Hadeeth Jibreel, the famous Hadeeth, where Jibreel alayhi salam came to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu was salam in the form of a handsome man that nobody who was in that gathering knew. And they were amazed by him, by his demeanor, his behavior, his physical appearance, and likewise his clothes up to his hair, because they didn't know who he was. And he addressed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam by using his name. He said, "Ya Muhammad." And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam kept asking him to come forward. So he asked the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, "Ya Muhammad, akhbirni anil Islam." Tell me about al-Islam. So the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that al-Islam is an tashhada an la ilaha illallah. Al-Islam is to bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah. وَأَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ, and that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the messenger of Allah. We also last week mentioned some details about how a person embraces al-Islam by saying the two shahadas, or what is equivalent to them, what gives their meaning. We also reviewed last time about how it's not permissible for a person to delay embracing al-Islam, and likewise how it's not permissible for a person to delay someone else embracing al-Islam. We gave the example, remember, of that person who was an imam standing on the mimbar giving the Friday sermon, and if somebody came in and said to him, "How do I embrace al-Islam?" then he would stop the khutbah, he would stop the sermon, and he would say to him, "You say no one deserves to be worshipped except God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God alayhi salatu wassalam." We mentioned Abu al-Qasim or Abu al-Qasim, which is another let's say, it's like a name of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, by which he is known. He is the father of Al-Qasim. So Abu al-Qasim is the messenger of Allah. So these are the matters that we mentioned last time. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam continued, and he said to Jibreel alayhi salam that al-Islam means, after the most important matter, after believing in Allah and believing in the messenger of Allah, it means to perform the prayer. وَتُقِيمُ الصَّلَاةِ, that this is a very, very important matter. A Muslim who doesn't commit the major sin of missing the obligatory prayers is someone who prays all of them at their time, unless they were excused. And a person has to do what is a must before being able to pray these prayers properly. So if a person wants to pray the obligatory prayer properly, they need to learn the matters of purification first. They need to learn what is a valid purification in terms of wudu, and even going further back to the ghusl. What is a valid ghusl? When do I need to do ghusl? the obligatory bath? When is it that I need to perform wudu? How do I perform wudu? What if I do it, I will no longer have wudu? Then, what are the integral matters of the prayer? What are the invalidators of the prayer? Only then when a person knows all of these things, will a person be able to pray a valid prayer. They'll be confident that they prayed a valid prayer. The Prophet ﷺ, he made clear that missing one fard prayer, it is an enormous sin. If a person misses an obligatory prayer without an excuse is like if they completely forgot. Like, for example, they prayed Al-Asr and they thought, okay, Al-Maghrib is, it's in an hour. And when Al-Maghrib came in, they were doing something that busied them, that distracted them. And an hour and a half passed, let's say, depending on what time of year it is. And Al-Maghrib, it went out, and Isha, the prayer of Al-Isha came in. They completely forgot. Not once did it cross their mind that Al-Maghrib is in, and I need to pray Al-Maghrib while the time was in. This person is excused. A person is not held to account for something that they forgot about. It's not within them to actively remember something. We forget. So such a person would be excused. That's an example of being excused. But if a person did not have an excuse and they missed an obligatory prayer, even one, then they commit an enormous sin. It's a major sin. It's not kufr to miss an obligatory prayer. If a person does miss an obligatory prayer, yes, it's an enormous sin, but a person doesn't become a kafir by that. A minority among the Muslim scholars, they did say that. They said if you miss an obligatory prayer, you become a kafir. But this is not the reliable saying. This is not what the majority of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah were upon. So anybody who misses an obligatory prayer, they commit an enormous sin. An enormous sin means that a person deserves punishment in hellfire. So they deserve it. Now, whether they receive that punishment or not, that's a different matter. So if a person misses one obligatory prayer, they deserve the punishment of Allah. If they miss two, then there's twice as much of them deserving the punishment of Allah in hell. And that goes for any major sin. We'll go through the major sins, inshaAllah. There are about 115 or 120 approximately. These are things that if a person does them, a person won't become a non-Muslim, but they are deserving of the punishment of Allah in hell. Like I said, whether they receive that punishment or not, that's a different matter. There will be, most definitely, people who do receive that punishment in hell. They will receive it, but some people will be forgiven. And that's where the shafa'ah, the intercession of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, comes in. So, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentioned to Jibreel alayhi salam that al-Islam means to be a Muslim, to have the correct belief in Allah, which we've discussed at length about the attributes of Allah, and to have the correct belief in the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wassalam, which we'll discuss a lot more inshaAllah soon, and to pray the obligatory prayer. The obligatory prayer, it has certain matters, it has certain merits which make it better than some deeds that are done that are seen as also great deeds. For example, the Prophet mentioned sallallahu alayhi wasallam that the obligatory prayer, the fard prayer like al-dhuhr, like al-fajr, it is better in rank than al-hajj. The Prophet said that, alayhi salatu wasalam. Now both are an obligation, of course. But al-hajj, yes, it contains a certain merit, which is what? That if a person performs a valid Hajj, a proper Hajj, a perfect Hajj, then all of his sins or her sins will be forgiven. And the person will be, as is in the Hadith, like on the day that a person was born, sinless. So Al-Hajj has that merit, yes. But just because it has that merit, it doesn't mean that it has a higher rank than the obligatory prayer. The Prophet made that clear, alayhi salatu wassalam, that this is the best deed that a person can do in general in the day. So it's better than Al-Hajj. So a person should not miss it. The Prophet mentioned, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that for a person to miss, as an example, to miss the Asr prayer, which is an obligatory prayer, then it's worse for a person to miss that prayer. It's worse than losing everything they have. Losing their mum, their dad, their brothers and sisters, their sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, grandparents, aunties, uncles, their business, their car, their house, all at once. The Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, missing deliberately and without an excuse. Missing the Asr prayer is worse. It's worse than having lost everything. The obligatory prayer, it is something that identifies someone as a Muslim. Yes, missing it on purpose doesn't make a person a kafir. But missing the obligatory prayer on purpose makes a person close to kufr. Close to kufr. So anybody who has obligatory prayers that they've not prayed in the past, whether they were excused or not. Another excuse is if a person was asleep before the prayer time came in, and when the prayer time finished, they were still asleep. Because they weren't awake during that time, they're not sinful. But they need to pray that prayer when they wake up. They need to pray that prayer before they die. So if anybody has one obligatory prayer to make up, they have one qada, or they have 10 qada, or a year's worth of qada, or they have 10,000 qada prayers that they need to make up, then these need to be made up before a person dies. If a person was excused, then yes, before a person dies, they need to be made up. And if a person was not excused, if a person was lazy and that's why they missed these obligatory prayers, then a person must make them up immediately. Immediately. A person who missed an obligatory prayer, just one, and then they die, then this death is known as mitatun khabitha, like a wicked death or a sinister death, a bad death. The situation is a bad one because they missed just one obligatory prayer. So a person should take care of this matter. And while they are still alive, while a person is still alive, if they've got prayers to make up, then they should work on that. A person plans. If a person doesn't know how many they've got to make up because they can't calculate, they don't remember when they became pubescent exactly. He doesn't remember when. Was it 14 or was it 15 or was it 12? She doesn't remember at what age she became pubescent. So she might, if she wants to make the prayers up, she might be a year off. Or she might pray extra. So here a person estimates. A person estimates to the extent that they would be comfortable. For example, if a person believed that they became pubescent at 13 and they only started praying when they were 18, so then they would make up the years from 13 all the way up to and before the 18-year mark. If they're still in doubt, they might say, okay, I'll pray an extra 6 months out of precaution, just so that I'm safe. Just so that I'm safe. And that's okay for a person to do. But a person needs to do that before they die. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the obligatory prayer, and we'll mention in the chapters that are after this more details about the obligatory prayer. Then he said, وَتُؤْتُ الزَّكَاةِ, and to give as zakah. This is a part of al-Islam. To give as zakah, i.e. first to learn about how much zakah a person has to give. If you have cows, sheep, cattle, you have camels, then you need to learn how many camels it is, that if you have that amount, then you've got to pay zakah, and how much you have to give. You have to give a camel away, you have to give 2 camels away. Like that is the case with money. Like that, gold and silver. Like that, if you have certain staple crops, if you have dates, if you have raisins. Like that, if you have a business, or you have a partnership with somebody, you might own 3 shares in the business and the other person owns 2. So a person needs to ask how much zakah they need to give. These rules in the religion of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam are very easy. He said, بُعِثْتُ بِالشَّرِيعَةِ السَّمْحَاءِ. He said alayhi salatu wasalam, I was sent with the easy rules. You know, in the past, there were nations that prayed 50 prayers a day. Muslim nations. And there were Muslim nations that gave a quarter of their money away in az-zakah. 25%. So if you think now that we give 2.5% of our yearly money away in the zakah, they would give 25%. A quarter of all of the things that they had, if they met the conditions. So these rules are very easy, but a person has to learn them. The Prophet ﷺ said, وَصَوْمِ Ramadan. This is a part of Islam. Fasting the month of Ramadan. وَحَجِّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. And performing al-Hajj, if one was able to find a way to Mecca. And like I said, inshallah, we're going to discuss these matters in detail later on down the line. Each chapter will have its time, inshallah. We'll extensively talk about these matters. Then Jibreel alayhi salam, after the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said this, he said to him, to the amazement of the companions, he said, Sadaqta. He said, you are truthful. Or in other words, you could say he told him, yes, you're right. As though he was somebody who was testing him. And when he gave the correct answer, Jibreel alayhi salam said, correct. So the companions, one of them said, فَعَجِبْنَا لَهُ يَسْأَلُهُ وَيُصَدِّقُهُ. We were astonished because we found him, first of all, coming and asking. Then when the Prophet ﷺ was given the answer, he says to him, correct. Correct. So they were amazed. So then he said, أخبرني عن الإيمان. Tell me, what is al-Iman? So the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Iman an tu'mina billah. Al-Iman, the correct belief. It is to have the correct belief in Allah. And this relates to the 13 attributes of Allah. Firstly, that Allah exists. He is nothing like the creation. Whatever you imagine, whatever you can imagine, Allah is not like that. Allah is unimaginable. Allah is unique. He is one. Allah is without a beginning. Allah is without an end. Allah Ta'ala is not in need. He is everlasting. He has knowledge, will. He has power. Allah sees without an eye. Allah hears without an ear. Allah has life without body and soul and nerves. Allah Ta'ala has kalam, which is an attribute that is not a sound, it's not letters, it's not in a language. It's the attribute by which Allah conveys to the creations what is obligatory upon them. These are the 13 attributes of Allah that no Muslim scholar differed about them being an obligation upon every Muslim to know. So this is the correct belief in Allah. The one who has al-Iman is called a mu'min and a Muslim. The one who has al-Iman is considered a believer. The Prophet ﷺ, he made clear the status of the believer. He said, إنما يدهده الجعل بأنفه خير من هؤلاء المشركين. He compared the people that have Iman and those that do not have Iman. So he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, those that don't have Iman, there is something that is better than them. He said, what is better than those that don't have Iman? He said that there is a beetle known as the dung beetle. And the dung beetle, it consumes dung, cow dung. And even human excrement. In some countries, in some of the hot countries, they would gather where there is excrement. The Prophet ﷺ said that what the dung beetle gathers together and rolls with its nose, it gathers this dung together, makes it into a small ball, and then it uses its nose to roll it back to its nest or its burrow. And it saves it to then eat it. It's dung, it's feces, it's excrement. The Prophet said, ﷺ, said that what the dung beetle rolls with his nose, that excrement, خَيْرٌ مِّنْ هَؤُلَاءِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, is better than the mushrikeen, meaning someone who doesn't have Iman. In status, this applies to everybody who doesn't have Iman. The one that has Iman is the one that says, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Allah revealed in the Quran, Inna sharra ad-dawabbi inda Allahi alladhina kafaru. That the worst creatures are those that do not have Iman. So the Prophet ﷺ made it very, very clear, such that, for example, you think of an animal. The Prophet ﷺ, his statement means that even an animal is better than the one that does not have al-Iman in status. The Prophet ﷺ was once performing a tawaf around the Kaaba, and he said, Ma a'zamaki, how grand you are, O Kaaba. While he was performing a tawaf, he was addressing the Kaaba. He said, Ma a'zamaki, wa ma atyaba rihaki, and how nice your fragrance is. He said that I swear by Allah, despite your status, your grand nature, Inna hurmat al-mu'mini a'zamu inda Allahi minki, which means that the status of a Muslim to Allah, the status of a Muslim to Allah is greater than your status. That the sanctity of the Muslim is more grand than the sanctity of the Kaaba. So it can be said, every Muslim has a higher status than the Kaaba. Why? The Prophet told us that, alayhi salatu wassalam. But further to that, it's because the Kaaba is made of stone. The Kaaba has blessings within it. But the Kaaba doesn't have a heart that contains belief. Al-Iman. The Muslim is the one that had this bestowed upon him, to have the correct belief in Allah Tabaraka wa ta'ala. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Iman an tu'mina billah, to believe in Allah, وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ, and to believe in his angels. There's also a chapter on the angels, inshallah, we'll discuss. But in brief, the angels are special creations of Allah. Neither are they male nor female. They do not eat, they do not drink, they do not sleep, they do not get tired, they do not reproduce, so they don't marry, and they do not disobey Allah. There is no angel that has ever committed a sin, ever. Sometimes you hear stories about this thing and that thing. No, there is no angel that has ever committed a sin. All of them are obedient slaves. Those of them that are inside paradise, taking care of paradise, obeying Allah in paradise, and those angels that are inside hellfire, waiting to punish those that will enter hellfire. All are obedient slaves. All are pious slaves of Allah Ta'ala. So to believe in them, to believe in their existence even though we haven't seen them, to believe that they carry out tasks that Allah has ordered them to carry out, from bringing down the rain, to bringing the wind, to taking care of the crops that sprout up from the earth, the earthquakes, the thunder, the lightning, writing down the deeds, helping Muslims. There are many things that the angels do, and they are more in number than the grains of sand and the droplets of rain that fall down and the leaves of all of the trees on earth put together. They are a very, very large number. Their leader is Jibreel alayhi salam. He is the chief angel. And like that, under him there are other leader angels, but he is their absolute leader. The Prophet said alayhi salatu wassalam, wa kutubihi, to believe in the books that Allah revealed. They're called kutub, but kitab actually means maktub in Arabic, meaning something written down. Some of the prophets, they didn't receive books per se, like we know a book from front cover, back cover, like that, but they received sheets, some of them, like 10 sheets and maybe 5 sheets. So they had things written on them. In total, there were 104. One of them is the Quran. One of them, or a second one, is Al-Injil. Another one is At-Tawrah. Another one is Az-Zabur. We believe in all of the books, if you will, that were revealed to the prophets of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, وَرُسُلِهِ, all of the messengers that Allah sent, all of the people that received revelation and were told, you are a prophet of Allah. We believe in all of them. Their number is approximately 124,000. Approximately. 25 of them were mentioned by name in the Quran. Some people, there is a difference in opinion about them. Like Luqman, after whom a surah is named in the Quran. Was he a prophet or was he a pious person, a wali? The scholars, most of the scholars said he was among the awliya, he was a wali. Dhul Qarnayn, who trapped Ya'juj and Ma'juj, was he a prophet or was he a wali? The scholars said, most of them said he was among the awliya, he was a wali. Al-Khadir alayhi salam, was he a prophet? Is he a prophet or a wali? Most of the scholars said that he is a prophet of Allah. So there are differences of opinion about some of these prophets. But whoever was a prophet, we believe in them. We believe that they all performed miracles, even if it was one miracle. We believe that they all prayed behind Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam in Bayt al-Maqdis on the night of Al-Isra and Al-Mi'raj. So we believe in all of them, and a whole chapter is going to come about the prophets. وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَالْإِيمَانُ أَن تُؤْمِنَ بِاللَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَكُتُبِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ, the last day. which is the Day of Judgment. It is 50,000 years long. It has 50 stages. Each stage is 1,000 years. 50 stages, each stage 1,000 years. That's 50,000 years. As Allah revealed in the Quran, كَانَ مِقْدَارُهُ 50,000 سَنَةً. On this day, there will be justice. Even the animals that are not accountable. Animals are not accountable. Sheep, goats, dogs, cats, they're not accountable. But even they, if they were harmed in this life, if they were treated unjustly in this life, even they will get justice on that day. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَسْأَلُ عَنِ الْإِبْرَةِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. That on the Day of Judgment, a person will be asked to this extent. A person will be asked even about a needle that they used unjustly. A needle that they misused. Even this, a person will be asked about on the Day of Judgment. He said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَسْأَلُ عَنِ الْإِبْرَةِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. If a person's going to be asked about a needle on the Day of Judgment that a person used unjustly, deliberately, on purpose, then what about taking someone's phone? What about taking someone's property, someone's house? What about changing the lines that separate one person's property from another person's property? What about taking a pen or a pencil or stealing someone's car and so on? All of the rights will be fulfilled and a person will be treated with justice, complete justice on the Day of Judgment. Even if a Muslim was to harm a kafir, then that kafir, the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, if a Muslim was to treat a non-Muslim unjustly in this life, then that kafir, if he was to ask Allah for something, that dua would be answered. This doesn't mean that he has a high status, but it shows the justice of Allah. He said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that there are some du'as that surely are given. He said, he mentioned the details of that hadith, and then he said, وَلَوْ مِنْ كَافِرٍ, even if it was a kafir, because even the kafir, even the non-Muslim must be treated with justice, of course. And a person has to learn those rules. So the Day of Judgment is a day that is coming, where people will be resurrected from the grave and they will be taken to the lands of Ash-Sham, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, a part of Turkey, a part of Iraq, and a part of Egypt. That is Ash-Sham. There the weighing of the deeds will take place. There a person will be given their book of deeds. It's important to note that the Day of Judgment isn't a scenario as some people might imagine it to be, and this is false. This is not what the Muslims believe. It's not the case that there will be a big chair there where supposedly this thing that they imagine that they call Allah, wal-'iyadhu billah, comes and sits like a judge, and then one person comes and is judged, and then it's said next, and then the next person comes, and then the next person comes, like in a courtroom. No. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala has always existed without being bound to one place or every place or any place. Allah is without place. Allah will not be on the earth on the Day of Judgment. Rather, the people will be given their book of deeds. The people will be questioned in a way that we'll discuss, inshaAllah, when we get to talking about the Day of Judgment more. But it's important that a person make sure that their loved ones don't have this incorrect belief that that Allah is this mist or this ghost or this nur type of being that will come on the day of judgment. No, Allah is without a place. وَتُؤْمِنَ بِالْقَدَرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ. The Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, al-Iman is to believe in al-Qadr, meaning to believe in the management of Allah, meaning to believe that Allah, by His will and by His eternal knowledge and by His power, Allah creates the things the way they are. That Allah is the one that manages the creation. Meaning, Allah is the one that has created everything. And it is by the will of Allah that everything is as it is and will be as it will be. وَبِالْقَدَرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ. This means that we must all believe as part of our Iman that everything good was created by Allah and everything that is bad and evil was also created by Allah. Because if a person says that Allah created the good but Allah didn't create the bad, then someone might ask, well, where did the bad come from then? It has to have a beginning. If someone says, oh well, the devil created it. Yeah, but we say La ilaha illallah. No one is God but Allah. No one can create but Allah. So here he's saying the devil can create. It's kufr. You've gone against La ilaha illallah. Allah created Iman and Allah created kufr. Allah created the prophets and the angels and Allah created Iblis and the shayateen. Allah Ta'ala created thawab and the good deeds and Allah created the sins and the bad deeds. Allah created them all. So a person must affirm that they believe that Allah is the creator of everything. Some people might think that. They might think that the devil creates, with the meaning that the devil is the one that brings things from non-existence into existence. No, this means create. This is saying that He is Allah. Creating, and Allah creates with His power. Creating, it is one of the attributes that is exclusively attributed to Allah alone. This is part of the uniqueness of Allah, the wahdaniyah of Allah, that only Allah creates. Allah is called God because Allah creates. So that is the meaning of believing in al-qadr khayrihi, the things that are good, that have a high status. Like the prayer, the obligatory prayer, it has a high status. Al-hajj has a high status. The nafal prayer has a high status. Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr, fasting on a Monday and a Thursday, they have a high status. Allah created them all. Wa sharrihi, also the things that are considered to be wicked or evil. To give an example from animals, something that's considered an honorable animal is a horse. That's why some of the scholars said that to eat it is makruh. It's disliked to eat because it's an honorable animal. So Allah created the honorable animals and Allah created the despicable animals like monkeys and pigs, things that it is sunnah to kill because they're harmful. Also like scorpions and snakes. Allah created them all. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Iman an tu'mina billah wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawmil akhir wa tu'mina bil qadari khayrihi wa sharrihi. So then Jibreel alayhi salam said to him again, remember how he was sitting? He had his two hands on the thighs of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, with his knees touching the knees of the Prophet. sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So he said to him, صدقت. This is correct. Then he said, فأخبرني عن الإحسان. What is ihsan? So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. Al-ihsan, firstly, it means to do more, to go the extra bit, to strive for perfection and then to become perfect. It is an obligation upon every single one of us to be pious, which means it is obligatory upon every one of us to do all the obligations. And it's an obligation upon every one of us not to commit sins. As soon as one of us commits a sin, then we have fallen short in that obligation. We're not fulfilling that obligation. The obligation is to not commit sins. Yeah? So a person who goes, let's look at one day. Consider yourself in one day. Imagine on this particular day, you didn't commit any sins. And you performed all of the obligations. This state, to be in this state, is an obligation. If a person was always upon this state of not committing sins and doing all the obligations, they would be considered a muttaqi, a taqi person, a pious person. But this is like, if you think about a staircase, this is like to be on the 50th step, let's say. How did a person get there? They didn't get there through luck. You can't be lucky and just find yourself going uphill, just find yourself stumbling uphill to the 50th step. You can't do that. A person has to learn first. When a person learns and identifies, oh, that's a sin, I need to stay away from that. That's a sin too. Oh, I've been doing this, that's a sin, I can't be doing that. I've just learned today that that's a sin. I'm going to avoid that now. One of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ said that I used to ask, that the people used to ask the Prophet ﷺ about the good things. Oh Messenger of Allah, if I do this and this, how much reward do I get? Oh Messenger of Allah, if I do this thing for my mom or my dad, do I get a house in paradise? Oh Messenger of Allah, if I give to the poor, what would happen to me on the Day of Judgment? They would ask about the good things. He said, وَكُنْتُ أَسْأَلُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ عَنِ الشَّرِّ. While they were asking about all the rewardable things, I would ask about the evil matters, the haram matters. He said, مَخَافَةَ أَنْ يُدْرِكَنِي. Out of fear that if I don't ask about the haram matters and know what they are, if I can't identify them, then I fear falling into them. Like the example that I gave in the past of imagine you're walking across a minefield. You don't know where the mines are. You got to get from A to B. So you just decide to run across. La ilaha illallah. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. But if you weren't so hasty and you took your time, and you said, well, okay, let me learn where they are. When I learn where they are, when I map it out, I review it, I memorize it. Okay, they've said I can't take the map with me. Fair enough. I'll memorize it, I'll work hard, and I'll learn where they are. So you walk through and you avoid all of the mines, you get to your destination. This is the way that a person should be. This is why the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, Ya ayyuhan nas, ta'allamu, learn. فَإِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ. That knowledge only occurs by learning. You don't fall asleep and one day wake up knowledgeable. It doesn't work like that. It works by taking notes and asking and getting clarity, and then avoiding the sins and making sure that one's obligatory acts are valid. Then after this comes al-ihsan. Then after this you have the extra deeds that you do above the obligations. You've ticked all the boxes of staying away from the haram. You've ticked all the boxes of continually doing the obligations, whether it's towards your parents, your spouse, your children, whether it's your obligations regarding your prayer, your obligatory fasting, your zakah, your day-to-day transactions that you do. Have you learned that they're okay or not? After all of this, then what you do that is extra, and you perfect it. This is al-ihsan. And it is of different levels. The Prophet ﷺ said, for example, advising some people, he said, "Alaykum bi salatil layl." He said, you should pray the night prayer, which is not the Isha prayer. This is an optional prayer, the tahajjud prayer. Even if a person wakes up before al-fajr, if al-fajr is at 6:30, if a person was to wake up at 5, or even 6, they made wudu, they prayed 2 rak'ahs of the optional prayer. Then they went to sleep again. And they woke up before al-fajr, before the sun rises, and they pray al-fajr. He said, alayhi salatu wasalam, alaykum bi salatil layl. You should pray the night prayer. فَإِنَّهُ كَانَ دَأْبَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ كَانَ دَأْبَ الصَّالِحِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. For indeed it was the way of the pious before you. The Prophet ﷺ drew out for us, figuratively speaking, this map of how to be perfect Muslims. But the determination and the self-motivation to do these things nowadays, especially with the enormous amount of distractions, this determination is now rock bottom in most people, such that many don't even know. Do you know, if a person sees a door, then they can think about going through it. What if they don't even know that the door is there? If they don't even know that this is how you become pious. These are the deeds after learning, that if you do them, and then the extra deeds after ticking off your obligations daily and staying away from the haram, these are the extra deeds that you do, that if you do them, you can be a pious person. You can be someone who's striving to be accepted by Allah. You can attain the acceptance of Allah. But many people don't even know that that road is there because they're distracted by other things. And this is a sad state. This is why now when we learn, we teach these things to our children. Many of these things have been lost in one sense. Many of these things have been lost. So Jibreel alayhi salam, he asked the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, he requested from him, فَأَخْبِرْنِي عَنِ الْإِحْسَانِ. Tell me, what is al-ihsan? So the Prophet said alayhi salatu wassalam, أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهِ. It is to worship Allah كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. To worship Him in a way as though you see Allah. We've already said, Allah is unimaginable. But if a person, while they were alive in this life, if they were seeing Allah, then how would this person's worship be? Ah, perfect. Just like if a person is at work, and if a person usually is very slack, they're very laid back, and then the manager walks in, suddenly they're as straight as an arrow, and they're so efficient. The work that they did in those 5 minutes, the efficiency that they had, MashaAllah, usually they get done in an hour and a half, but the manager was there, he was making coffee. He's watching. My career's on the line. This person, if that authority figure is there or is watching, then how would a person behave? How would a person work? The efficiency levels, they go sky high. They become multiplied. So he said, alayhi salatu wassalam, al-ihsan is to worship Allah as though you see Allah. This is an expression of a person showing the ultimate humbleness, the ultimate submission to the Creator, Allah Ta'ala. You think about submission. We submit ourselves to Allah. We worship Allah. One of the most honorable organs or the parts of the body that the human has is the forehead. The forehead. We put this forehead on the place where people step, isn't it, on the floor? We do that for Allah because we worship Allah Ta'ala. If a person's state is like this always, whether they are walking to their car or they are entering their house or they're switching the light off before they go to sleep, or they're cooking, or they're talking to one of their friends, or they are out shopping, buying the groceries. If a person's state was like this, if they always remembered, Allah sees me, Allah sees me, Allah sees me, and so they use that as a drive for them to always be engaging in the good. If they did that, then they would have reached this stage of worshipping Allah as though one sees Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ, he said, فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. That you know that in this life, we do not see Allah. It is in the hereafter that the believers will be given the ability to see Allah. And we cannot imagine this because Allah is and will always be without a place and will always be unlike the creation. When the believers see Allah, the believers will be in paradise. Allah will not be in a place, as many of the scholars clarified. So, know that if you do not see Allah in this life, which we don't, then know that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala sees you always. This is an encouragement for a person to do the good deeds always, to fear Allah always. One of the great awliya, one of the awliya who lived at the time of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, his name was Al-Imam Ahmad al-Rifa'i. He said, من لم يحاسب نفسه عند كل نفس ويتهمها لم يثبت عندنا في ديوان الرجال. He said, whichever person does not think, does not hold himself to account at every breath, except for when we're asleep, we're conscious of what we're doing, or we should be conscious of what we're doing with every breath. He said, whoever doesn't hold themselves to account, control themselves, protect themselves from falling into sin, at every breath, meaning a person just lets themselves go. When a sinful matter comes, they kind of ignore the fact that it's a sin and they just do it because they want the pleasure from it. They want to have that laugh. They want to experience that thing that is sinful. They kind of turn a blind eye to it being sinful. So here they haven't done that. They haven't controlled themselves at that particular breath. He said such a person who doesn't hold himself to account, it's as though if there was a book, if there was a register that had the name of real men in it, that person's name isn't in that register. He was a pious person. He said, we, the pious people, he said it humbly, we do not consider that person to be a man, or to be manly, or to be someone who is of a high status, even if it was, of course, a woman, then she wouldn't be of a high status, as though we don't. Because this person isn't so intelligent to be able to control themselves and to think about what they're doing at every breath. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he was asked by Jibreel, فَأَخْبِرْنِي عَنِ السَّاعَةِ, tell me about the day of judgment. Tell me about when the day of judgment is. So he said, alayhi salatu wassalam, مَا الْمَسْئُولُ عَنْهَا بِأَعْلَمَ مِنَ السَّائِلِ. He said to Jibreel alayhi salam, that the one that is being asked, i.e. me, i.e. the Prophet, he said, the one that is being asked about the time of the day of judgment doesn't know more than the one that is asking. Meaning, I don't know and you don't know. مَا الْمَسْئُولُ عَنْهَا بِأَعْلَمَ مِنَ السَّائِلِ. This is to teach the Muslims that only Allah knows exactly when the day of judgment will occur. Exactly when the horn will be blown into. Otherwise, the Prophet ﷺ gave us indications based upon what he received by revelation. He mentioned signs of the day of judgment that we're going to mention a few just now. He mentioned signs. He also said that 100 years would pass after the Muslims die, after the fragrance comes and takes the souls of the Muslims. He said on earth, there would be people on earth, 100 years would pass in which nobody says La ilaha illallah, meaning in which nobody is a believer. Some people, it's mentioned in some hadiths, will say La ilaha illallah, but in the form of a question. They'll say, what's this La ilaha illallah that, the people of the past used to say? But they will not be Muslims, kuffar for 100 years, and then after those 100 years, the day of judgment, the horn will be blown into. Someone will be selling clothes in the market, and they will be folding the clothes, and suddenly the horn will be blown. So we have information about its coming, and when it will occur in terms of what some people will be doing, but exactly when it is, exactly what second, nobody knows that other than Allah. Like exactly when the rain falls, nobody knows that other than Allah, and so on. So the Prophet ﷺ, he is teaching us that this is a matter that is known to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So then Jibreel alayhi salam asked him, فَأَخْبِرْنِي عَنْ أَمَارَاتِهَا. So tell me about its signs. So he said alayhi salatu wassalam, أَن تَلِدَ الْأَمَةُ رَبَّتَهَا. One of its signs is that when these things happen that he's going to mention, that means that it's getting closer. He said in the future, what would occur is that a female, a daughter, her behavior will be such, her bad behavior, her mistreatment of her mother will be such that the Prophet ﷺ compared the mother to being like the slave of the daughter. So it would be the daughter who orders her mother around. It would be the daughter who is mean to the mother, who insults the mother, who belittles the mother, who degrades her, who embarrasses her, who does not obey her mother. This is one of the signs of the Day of Judgment. He said, أن تلد الأمة ربتها, that a woman would give birth to her female, if you will, master. She will give birth to a female who it's as though she becomes her owner, as though the mother is a slave. He said, alayhi salatu wassalam, وَأَن تَرَى الْحُفَاةَ الْعُرَاةَ. He said that you will see people who will be barefoot, and you will see people who will be said to be clothed, but they will not actually have a lot of clothes on. They will be covering their awrah. Al-ala. You will see the people who are barefoot now and don't have enough clothes to cover all of their body, just their awrah. And they are poor now in the Prophet's time, alayhi salatu wasalam. Ri'a ash-sha', they are shepherds. They are poor shepherds of sheep. يَتَطَاوَلُونَ فِي الْبُنْيَانِ. In the future you will see these very people that I described now competing to build high buildings. And this is a sign of the Day of Judgment that has already occurred. Like the first one. It is in the Arab lands now, where people for a while now, about 20 years now, they've been competing to build the highest buildings. One of the highest buildings, or if not the highest building, is now within the Arab lands. So this has already happened. After this, Jibreel alayhi salam, he got up. And in this hadith, some of the signs of the Day of Judgment are mentioned, but there are many, many more than this. Inshallah, it's facilitated. We can go through all of the signs of the Day of Judgment, inshallah ta'ala, but later on, inshallah. So he got up and he left. So Sayyiduna Umar radiyallahu anhu said, فَلَبِثْتُ مَلِيًّا. He said that some time passed over me, a long time passed over me. Probably 3 days passed over me, passed by. And then, after 3 days, the Prophet ﷺ said to me, Ya Umar, atadri man is-sa'il? O Umar, do you know who that questioner was? So Sayyiduna Umar radiyallahu anhu, he said, no. When Jibreel alayhi salam, he got up and he was leaving, he left. He was out of sight. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, go and bring that man back to some of his companions. So they went. They looked everywhere and they didn't find him. They said, O Messenger of Allah, he disappeared. We didn't find him. So then the Prophet ﷺ, after 3 days, he said to Sayyiduna Umar, Ya Umar, atadri man is-sa'il? Do you know who that questioner was? He said, La ya Rasulullah. He said, فَإِنَّهُ Jibreel. It was Jibreel alayhi salam. جَاءَكُمْ يُعَلِّمُكُمْ دِينَكُمْ. He came to teach you about your religion. He came to teach you in the way of asking a question, even though he already knows. But he did that to teach you these particular matters of the religion. The Prophet ﷺ had a teacher, and that was Jibreel ﷺ. So it is not something at all shameful or embarrassing to have someone teach you or me, even if we are now in our 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s. Some people started learning what they needed to know of religious knowledge in their 70s and 80s. But they knew that we have time still before we die. As long as I'm alive, I have time. So it's not something that a person should be neglectful of, to not learn the religious knowledge. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqihu fid din." A good sign for a person's hereafter, for a person's grave, for a person's barzakh, and the day of judgment, and then the hereafter. A good sign is that they find themselves learning the religious knowledge. This is a good sign. This means Allah facilitated that path for you. The Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, the one whom Allah eternally willed something good for, Allah made them knowledgeable about the religious matters. The person doesn't have to be a scholar, but they know what they need to do in terms of raising their children, in terms of providing for their family, in terms of their own obligations. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man salaka tariqan yatlubu fihi ilman." Whoever embarks upon a path to acquire religious knowledge. A person doesn't have to go abroad. Whoever continues acquiring the religious knowledge, سَهَّلَ اللَّهُ لَهُ بِهِ طَرِيقًا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. Whoever embarks upon this path and starts on this path, Allah will make a way for this person, will facilitate a way, will pave a way, a path for a person, the path to paradise. But remember also, he said, alayhi salatu wassalam, حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِهِ وَحُفَّتِ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. The path to paradise, this path, the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam said it's hard. He said, this path, حُفَّت, imagine a path and then the door of paradise. A path that leads there. He said this path is surrounded by things that a person finds difficult. Imagine you have a path, you've got to get home. You can either take this path, which will take you 1 minute, or you can take this path, this way around, it will take you an hour. Right? It takes you an hour. But this path here that takes a minute, there are shrubs and bushes and nettles, and there are thorns, and it's really dark. You can't even see the sun. It's so dark. And yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult. And once you walk there and you saw the corpse of a rat, and it's not nice. So the path to paradise, it's not flowers and roses and just like, you will levitate on a cloud, to paradise. It's hard. Performing the obligations is not easy. Allah created it like this. Allah created this life like this. That's why the pious person, the Prophet ﷺ said about him, for him, this life, he said, "Ad-dunya sijnul mu'min." For the perfect believer, this life is like a prison. It's like he's imprisoned. But obviously a person can't commit suicide because that's a major sin. A person has to be patient with it while performing the obligations, while dealing with family members, while dealing with one's children's problems, while dealing with the marriage, while perhaps dealing with someone's in-laws or one's own in-laws, by dealing with poverty, by dealing with paying the bills, but still performing the obligations. It's not easy. It's not easy. So when a person starts on this path of learning religious knowledge, and the person is afflicted with hardships, the devil comes and says, look, you started learning, you didn't have these problems before. Look at these problems. Why are you learning? When you were learning, you didn't have any of these problems. The Prophet told us these things, alayhi salatu wasalam. This is what the devil does. Textbook devil stuff. If there ever was a devil's guide, that's it. He comes to a person and says, you start praying, look, now, you can't do this and this and this and this. At that time when you used to pray, you started learning the religious knowledge, look how it's making things harder for you. Now, you can't say this, you can't do that, you've got to watch your tongue, you've got to... This is what the devil does. Subhanallah. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that hardships come to the people who are better. This is usually the case. That a person is tested. Hardships come, the better a person is, the more the hardships come. But also, let a person not be fooled. There's a person who doesn't pray and they drink alcohol and they get hardships. Those are hardships because of their sins. Let's stop here today, inshaAllah. Let's say, La ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi